Hi, this is Kasian, and it's time for our weekly conference call at VectorspaceAI. We'll start with what's happening around the world. BTC is trading at 63K, ETH is at 2400, and the Dow is at 33.8. NASDAQ, the S&P are making new highs. There have been a variety of hurdles in rollouts for vaccinations worldwide. The U.S. intelligence community has produced a report related to the coronavirus, as they called it. Food insecurity has reached a new 10-year high, according to this report. And, in quotes, the economic fallout from the pandemic is likely to create or worsen instability in at least a few, perhaps many countries, as people grow more desperate in the face of interlocking pressures that include sustained economic downturns, job losses, and disrupted supply chains, the report warns. Coinbase's IPO today, they hit a high of 429 and they closed at 322. And that left them with a $60 billion market cap. On the industry side, behind Microsoft's Nuance deal, natural language processing explained. This was from the Wall Street Journal. And they went over the rationale behind Microsoft's acquisition of Nuance and their natural language processing intellectual property for $16 billion. That article would be worth taking a look at as it does intersect with our industry. Data labeling company Scale AI valued at $7.3 billion with new funding. And that is a title taken from Fortune magazine related to a dataset company that engages in data labeling, and that's primarily, of course, for supervised learning and classification. Space infrastructure is the next investment frontier, and SPACs are a launchpad. That's from MarketWatch. And on Monday, Blue Origin was among 3 companies awarded with U.S. government contracts to design the concept nuclear-powered spacecraft. And then another Blue Origin headline, Blue Origin rocket moves closer to flying humans with the latest launch. And NASA, SpaceX, are go to launch Crew 2 astronauts to space station on Earth Day, April 22nd. And our next headline, there is an astronaut by the name of Kate Rubins who's returning to Earth this week. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially based on how we can compare what happened with Scott Kelly and a few other astronauts related to their exosomes and their return to Earth. Under themes and events, based on what's happening with the rollout for the vaccine related to the virus, we can see that, and we've seen a pattern, not just in research, but news as well. And this is where things seem to be headed into drug repurposing here, as vaccination rollouts continue to be rocky, and in fact, there may be a third vaccination needed here. So drug repurposing, finding drugs that can combat viruses, infectious diseases, and so forth, would be a pertinent theme. And that also connects to precision medicine, which is something that connects to personalized medicine, of course, and data sets. Another theme and event has been ESG, and we've seen this pattern in potential customers we've been talking to in terms of their requests for data sources related to generating thematic baskets related to ESG. And of course, a theme and event related to space is key here, as we just about have maybe 2 or 3 space companies a week issuing a SPAC or issuing news related to their entrance into this new space race. On the corp side, we've got a new executive summary that we're working on. This executive summary will contain new corporate structure related to the company in our efforts related to space biosciences. We're also going to be offloading a bit of administrative work to Mina's lab at LB&L. Under engineering, product, QA, and ops, we've got two categories, the financial industry and space biosciences. First off, under the financial industry, we are preparing to scale. That is, preparing to take orders, as we've been talking with about 10 funds, and they are going back to their groups to determine what kind of trials they want to engage in. And then, of course, we've got orders from S&P Global that we are preparing for as we roll out our datasets, prepare to roll out our datasets onto their platform. And then we're still under engineering, product, QA, and ops, and under space biosciences. We are also continuing to scale, and that would simply mean understanding what it takes to roll out data engineering pipelines at scale for all space biosciences efforts. And then understanding the components that are involved in a space biosciences company. And we can go over some of these components later on here. We'll also be engaged in acquiring a number of low-level security clearances as we interface with certain government labs, the wet labs inside these government labs. On the customers, partners, and collaborators side, again, we've got two categories here. We'll start with the financial industry. In terms of our financial offerings, financial product offerings, we've got CoinMetro, and we updated last week that CoinMetro would be ready in a couple of weeks, and they are just about ready. We've been in communication with them, and looks like they may have a few engineering resources freeing up sooner than later. And then we've been involved with Stage 2, what we call Stage 2 communication with funds and institutions. These are hedge funds and institutions and asset management companies. The reason that we have classified this as Stage 2 communication is that it's based on communicating that the trials will be available only to those that hold VXV. So for Stage 2, we've been talking with Hudson Trading and Morgan Stanley, Lake Partners, Millennium Management, State Street, and Hermes Capital. And for Stage 1, we've been talking with, where we talked with in the past, BlackRock, Blue Shift, and Cube, it's a quant house, and Schoenfeld. Now, each of these in Stage 2 and in Stage 1 have been given a packet, and this packet represents common threads that have been requested across these customers. We're looking at 10 funds here, and each of these funds have been communicated to in terms of how to access the API and what it takes to attain a trial with us. And we'll go into detail on that in just a bit. We have a meeting with S&P on Tuesday, April 20th, and that's to secure the licensing. All other partners and customers and collaborators remain queued and in the pipeline related to the financial industry. In terms of space biosciences, we are building out our scientific advisory board, and so far we do have Mina Bissell and her lab. We've got Eleanor Blakely's labs. We've also got Amy Cronenberg and her labs. And that includes NASA Space Biosciences, as Eleanor Blakely and Amy Cronenberg provide advice and guide experiments and provide valuable collaboration related to radiation's effect on the human body to NASA Space Biosciences. We'll continue to build out the SAB, the Scientific Advisory Board, as that is central to our space biosciences efforts. We are also looking at precision and personalized medicine. Precision medicine and personalized medicine. We've talked about this in the past, but this has a lot to do with protecting and repairing the human body. Microsoft's Azure Space and SpaceX, that is still in process. And of course, we've got CERN, who we were collaborating with on the literature side to determine relationships between particles, extracting relationships, hidden relationships between particles. These particles, some of them represent an intersection between what's being studied in space biosciences. So, of course, there'll be rich interdisciplinary work between the two groups, Berkeley Lab and CERN. On the sales and marketing side, as mentioned, we've distributed a packet to 10 funds, and that is steady as she goes. We'll wait to hear for replies. On the IR, PR, and Marcom side, this is in process. With these 10 funds, this is a form of investor relations. More so than press relations or press communications or marketing and communications, this process that we're involved with in terms of communicating to these funds that they have the availability to, or they have our data sets are available for them to create clusters and thematic baskets based on global events, based on a trial. These funds now recognize what they need to do to get on trial with VectorspaceAI by obtaining VXV. And right now, these funds, including Millennium Management and Lake Partners, are going back to, we've been notified that they're going back to internal groups to share this document and the fact that our correlation matrix data sets can be used to do a variety of things, not just generate thematic baskets, but engage in portfolio protection and so forth. But more so than that, we do have data provenance, data security, data lineage, and data governance managed by the VXV token. And we've explained this to them in detail. As I can explain here, if I bring this up, we're offering a 1-month trial. Well, first off, in the packet, the first portion of the packet describes the API. Then we've got another portion describing the data dictionary, and that would include supplemental data sources. And then we've got a use cases section where we describe applications in particle physics, applications in space biosciences, and then applications in the financial markets where we describe the event, in quotes, coronavirus, based on the historical performance of that thematic basket that we generated January 21st, 2020. We also have the event GameStop and the thematic basket that was generated based on components or stocks related to GameStop and how those rose by 37% over a period of days without having the risk of trading GME alone. And then, of course, we've got generating alpha from information arbitrage in the financial markets with NLP datasets as a case study. And we've provided a few other references. And finally, we talk about how to access the trial. And we offer a 1-month trial. And to access a trial, we say that you'll need to acquire a minimum of 100 VXV utility tokens. And keep in mind, this is just the trial. They're provided a link to our coin market cap entry, and it continues the VXV utility token is an ERC20 token used to ensure that every change to your data set, including each correlation score, is hashed via blockchain to provide a maximum level of dataset provenance, lineage, governance, and security. The trial API uses a VXV wallet address as the API key. The VXV wallet address must have a minimum of 100 VXV utility tokens to access datasets specific to your trial. To get started, contact us anytime. And that is the onboarding process. That sums up the onboarding process, as well as the packet that's being distributed internally. And for a few of these funds, we can't tell you which ones, but they've agreed to, or they offered to talk to their customers and their clients about what we're offering with these data sets. So that was interesting to hear, good to hear. So that in itself is a form of marketing and awareness that we are now creating among these 10 funds, and we've got many more funds to go. These are the top 10 funds that we've chosen to work with in terms of their interest that they expressed in us as well. On the exchanges side, that is in process. In terms of questions from the trader base, we'll have a separate call for that so that we can move straight to our strategy section. And we'll probably want to collect a few more questions based on this call and include them in our questions from the trader base section, which we'll address in a more complete and thorough way in a separate call. Moving on to strategy, we have focuses here, and we don't have a single focus because we've got knowledge domain expertise in two industries, that is the financial industry and the space biosciences industry. In terms of the financial industry, our focus is going to be on creating ESG thematic baskets, understanding what data sources are needed. And again, this is because we have had 3 requests from funds that we've talked to, hedge funds, asset management companies, related to whether or not we can generate ESG baskets. ESG is an overarching theme that can be made up of several sub-themes or subcategories. And we'll go ahead and deliver data sources to those funds that have requested data sources for a trial. On the space biosciences side, in terms of strategy, it's important for the public to understand why we have a focus on space biosciences, and it's because we always have. We'll continue to go over details in this area in terms of our strategy and building out a space biosciences company, essentially. We got our start at Genentech, analyzing HER2 and breast cancer therapies. In 2000, we began to work with a company called XMine. They were funded by a company called Fibrogen, run by Tom Neff, and the objective was to understand what bioinformatics tools, how we can create tools to extract relationships between genes, drugs, and diseases. Because the human genome was first sequenced, it was finished being sequenced in 2000 by Craig Venter and Francis Collins. And after we did that, we were invited to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in 2002, and that's where we worked on LAT radiation. In fact, the title of the paper that was first introduced to us was Radiation-Induced DNA Damage and Chromatin Structure, PubMed ID 11765060. At the time, Meta Bissell's lab was working on the extracellular matrix and has always been working on that. Groundbreaking research related to BRCA1 and BRCA2, along with DNA repair genes, XRCC1 through 6, and TP, of course, famous genes such as TP53 and TP73 and their related pathways. We did a lot of pathway analysis back then and relationship mapping between genes, proteins, enzymes, drug compounds. Part of our work was funded by space biosciences contracts that were the result of a collaboration between Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and NASA's Space Biosciences Unit. Eleanor Blakely, she is an editor of NPJ Microgravity, but also publishes in Journal of Life Sciences Space Research. But beyond that, she has a long history in understanding radiation's effect on the human body, and she's in fact a pioneer in space radiation research and mentors and trains NASA's Space Biosciences Division. To quote, her interest lies deep in the cell cycle and what happens to the DNA, for example, as a function of radiation exposure. While her work has been of great value in helping oncologists, it is the fundamental process that fascinates her as a benchtop scientist, to use her own words. And here's a quote from her. "I'm interested in the body's feedback mechanism," she explains. Blakely followed her first group leader into space, at least as a benchtop scientist, with studies of the effects of low radiation doses for the U.S. Space Agency, NASA. In space, and I quote, "In space, people are exposed to chronic low doses of radiation," she explains. In particular, she's been studying heavy ion-induced tumorigenesis in mice with a broad gene pool similar to humans to evaluate any risks in space travel. So that's Eleanor Blakely. She'll be joining our scientific advisory board, her labs, and that will be along with labs of Amy Cronenberg, who is another pioneer in radiation research and cancer. So these were also scientists at Berkeley Lab who designed experiments for NASA Space Biosciences, including launching tissue samples and DNA into space, seeing its effect, seeing the radiation's effect in real time. And this is something we'll be doing as well in Space Biosciences. From end to end, we'll have to have an A to Z approach, and that would mean starting with data engineering pipelines all the way to the wet lab or wet bench. And of course, conducting experiments in collaboration with Lawrence Berkeley Lab and NASA Space Biosciences, in addition to a few other labs. At that time when we were at the lab, we wrote a paper with Saira Mian, Michael I. Jordan, who was the teacher of Andrew Ng, who established Google's first AI system and Baidu's first AI system. And David Blee was also on the paper. The paper was related to genes that were capable of extending the lifespan of nematodes. What we did was we looked at how we were establishing relationships between genes, drugs, and diseases, and decided to establish relationships between public companies and global events and topics. And what happened was in 2004, we noticed a global event. This was when Merck had the Vioxx debacle. They issued a drug. They released a drug called Vioxx, and this drug started causing heart attacks. So they withdrew the drug and were sued for about $600 million. The day that this news came out, their stock dropped by 21%. What we decided to do was take our system that analyzed hidden relationships between genes, drugs, and diseases, and we asked the system to process, on top of the genomic data that it was already processing, genes and gene descriptions, protein descriptions, and so forth, scientific papers, life sciences papers. We were also processing public company profiles. So we combined the two. And what that enabled us to do was ask the system to give us public companies that were most closely associated to Merck. And the number one company that it gave us was Pfizer, PFE. And sure enough, Pfizer dropped about 8 weeks later by 14% because Pfizer, although it wasn't issuing a new drug called Vioxx, it certainly had compounds in its pharmaceutical pipelines related to COX-2 inhibitors and COXIBs. And these proteins were the ones causing the problem with Vioxx. And that's why Merck dropped. Our system caught this based on the hidden relationships that Pfizer shared with Merck. And of course, if you had Pfizer in your portfolio, you would have been able to protect your portfolio, and understanding that a contagion would have existed where Pfizer was the one infected at this point. There were other companies infected as well. We began to recognize that public companies clustered similar to the way human genes clustered. So this unsupervised approach enabled us to create clusters of public companies, just like we did with genes, such that these clusters doubled as baskets of stocks that we could relate to global events. So we created language models for this. We created data engineering pipelines for this, and that resulted in data sets for the financial markets. It resulted from an interdisciplinary approach. So briefly, let me just explain what we'll be focusing on with Vectorspace Biosciences. We'll have a dry lab. The data sources included will relate to the extracellular matrix, ECM, exosomes, dormancy, DTCs, epigenomics, microbiomics, nutrigenomics, galactic cosmic radiation, GCR, HCE, LET, LDIR radiation, and CRISPR, gene therapy, personalized precision medicine, nanobots, graphene, and other rare elements, zero-point energy, ZPE, and its effect on the twisting and turning of amino acids to form proteins. We'll also have a data engineering effort, data engineering pipelines in place. We'll have a team for that and a team for visualization and AR and XR pipelines. And then, of course, we've got our wet labs. The internal wet lab we'll have will be the result of a collaboration between LB&L, Mina's lab, and ourselves, including a possible Berkeley Richmond facility, which we have a relationship with. We'll build out our own wet labs as we described last week. We'll also have external wet labs. NASA Space Biosciences will be one, including anything that results from the Microsoft Azure SpaceX collaboration. Cell lines we'll be focusing on. We won't go into those now. The environment and materials, we've covered that. Okay, so the bottom line here is that science today, much of science, happens based on data engineering, data science, applying ML and AI to extract patterns and find hidden relationships. But more importantly, to speed up the process of hypothesis generation, to speed up the process of discovery. This is a main bottleneck in science. And in order for us to repair ourselves 100 times faster, we're going to have to come up with discoveries 100 times faster. And this is what data engineering pipelines enable a company to do, or enable a scientific research effort to do. In the case of Space Biosciences, this will be the foundation. This is where we start. We'll have a scientific staff and the SAB in place. We'll also have visualization teams, as described, in addition to components that we will treat as wet labs, and external wet labs we'll also treat as components. And we'll be bringing in data for these external labs and creating data sets. Some might ask, why a wet lab? Well, when you analyze the literature, when you create language models, when you make predictions, or you're able to engage in hypothesis generation, and you want to test it, you've got to create an experiment. And it's nice to be able to have a lab that you can immediately send an experiment to. And this is all unpublished work. This means that after you've finished the experiment, you've got a data set. That data set can be immediately combined or analyzed to come up with a new insight or a new interpretation, or in fact a new discovery quickly. So you do speed the process of discovery by, of course, creating all of your tip of the spear NLU language models, but at the same time being able to validate any findings or hypotheses very quickly in a high throughput way. And some might ask, why are we going into space biosciences? It's because this is what we know. This is where we have the most knowledge domain expertise. And space biosciences will be central to advancements happening today in space. Advancements in space can't happen without space biosciences, and that's why we're here. Any resulting advancements in space biosciences will continue to benefit cancer therapies, lifespan, and health span. And that impacts all of life sciences. And in fact, new models that we produce, new methods from an interdisciplinary approach can be applied to other industries. Advancements made in space biosciences can be commercialized across all industries. Just as it has in the financial industry with datasets for generating thematic baskets with hidden relationships to global events. This has been a pre-recorded call. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to join us online. Thanks. 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 Thanks.